And we appreciate that. Looks like I got Bill Bright just came in to jump in. And we've got a couple of others that I'm confident are going to jump on as we go along. And so, Jeremy, I am um, thrilled that you are going to participate with us. And just so everybody knows, Jeremy Gay is a attorney down at Advocate Law Center. And Jeremy, it's been my experience, Jeremy knows what he's talking about. He's been a wonderful resource for legal advice and such like that. And, the great part, I'm going to just turn off this music in the background. The great part is that Jeremy has volunteered his time to come and talk to us about the New Mexico Owner Resident Relations Act, which is really, really critical, I think, when it comes to rentals and landlords and what the rules are. What is the Owner Resident Relation Act as you understand it, Jeremy?
Well, Jason, the act, it breaks down, it just gathers all the statutes and relevant statutes for landlords and for tenants, what their duties are, what their rights are, how to proceed when there's a disagreement, how to give proper notice. It really gives the guideline how to conduct business between landlords and tenants, and how to interpret leases where they're silent to certain provisions. And again, that's going to cover any typical real estate that you're renting, whether it be a condo, apartment, townhouse, or a house. And actually, if you're renting a mobile home, which is common in Gallup, you'll have a separate act. Let me see here, and that's gonna be your Mobile Home Park Act. So between those two, you're gonna really capture any rental agreement issues that take place here in New Mexico.
All right. Well, and that's one of the reasons, Jeremy, that we asked you is because, it's a common belief, from the landlord standpoint that the tenants always do something wrong. And then there's a lot of tenants in Gallup, New Mexico that in I think most of our opinions are being taken advantage of because they don't know their rights. So I'm actually going to make you the host here. I don't know if you have slides you're going to share or whatever, but I'm going to make you the host here, and I am going to allow you to go ahead and take control of this thing, man. This is on it's on yours. I'm just going to sit back and shut up and listen.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason. Well, to get into it, Jason gave me a good introduction. I'm here to talk to you today about your rights and duties before in the state of New Mexico for renting as a tenant and renting out as a landlord. Now, as means of background, I kind of came into experience in this field through my service in the United States Marine Corps. Between defending and prosecuting active duty military members, I was put in charge of a legal assistance center in which I helped thousands of active duty and veterans and their family members navigate being tenants and landlords. So I've seen thousands and thousands of these different issues, different landmines and pitfalls, and I'll cover some of those today. So again, this is gonna be a general overview of New Mexico, your landlord rights and duties, your tenant rights and duties. And I also present it in a timeline fashion. So if you're a new landlord or you've got an idea, I think a lot of us are looking for alternative ways of building assets and to have other streams of revenue, or maybe you've been a landlord for years and years and maybe you can get better at it, or you need a primer course. Hopefully this will be helpful. So we're gonna kick it off and focus first on landlords. So we talked about landlords' rights and duties. First of all, you have to have a location suitable to rent. Make sure that you own the property outright, or you have it mortgaged, or what have you. If you are a tenant currently and you're looking to rent out your property to someone else, make sure you're legally allowed to do it. That's called subletting. So make sure you're free and clear and you have all the rights necessary to rent out the property and that the location is suitable. Next step is to look in the mirror and ask yourself, do you want to be a landlord? Being a landlord is a big responsibility. It's not something that should be entered into casually. It's a big relationship you're going to form. And you're going to have a lot of duties that you're going to owe to maybe an individual, maybe a family, a duty to provide them, which we'll cover, but a duty to provide them with a safe environment, and many other things. So let's get into that. So you've got a home that you want to rent out, or an apartment you want to rent out. What's the condition that's it in? How are you going to protect yourself first and foremost? So if you've asked yourself, do you want to be a landlord? The answer is yes. Well, there's two forms. If you want to be a hands-on landlord who deals with this all themselves and is ready to accept calls in the middle of the night because the water's gone out or the room's flooded or the home's been damaged or there's been a break-in, or do you want to be more hands-off? Do you want to consult with a property management firm? I know that Jason can be a resource for that. So if you need to get more information, obviously contact him. But there are property management firms that can take that step to stand between you and the tenant and not absolve you of all your right or your duties, but handle the nitty-gritty day-to-day. So really evaluate how much time you have, your patience, your interest in embarking into this, because it can be very fruitful financially. You can form great relationships, but it can be very stressful and trying. And if you're not in a position to do it, don't do it, because it's difficult to get out of once you've entered into it. So you've determined you want to be a landlord. Well, step one is going to be to find a tenant. Now, in finding a tenant, you're going to want to conduct a background check, a credit check. You're going to want to have an application process. You're not going to want to just go on Facebook and say, hey, I have a property. Does anyone want to rent it? And then someone says yes, and you go, okay, let's do this. And they move in because you have no idea who they are. You don't know their financial situation. You don't know the background. You don't know if they're going to be a good fit. You're going to want them to be in a position to financially afford the location that you're providing. It's not going to serve you or them to get them into a unit that they're only going to be able to rent for a few months, and then they're not going to be able to pay you anymore. So do some background. So what's fine is conducting a background check, a credit check, having an application, and finding out, do they have pets? What are the family members? How many people are going to be in a house? This is important to know. What's not okay, and I'll read directly from this, is the Fair Housing Act, which you can find in United States Code, Title 42, Chapter 45. You can't discriminate based on race, color, national origin, religion, gender, family status, or disability. So make sure that those aren't questions on your application. Make sure you're not asking a potential tenant about any of those things, because it's not relevant for your determination. And you don't want the appearances that you're making any decisions based off any of these factors. Okay, so you found a tenant, you've done a background check. It looks as though that tenant's going to be a good fit for you. Some people just go into an oral lease where they say, okay, you're renting this property for me, you're paying rent, we have an agreement, we've shaken hands. My word is my bond, let's go forward. Don't do that. Get a lease. You need a written lease. There are many reasons you need a written lease: to protect yourself and to protect the tenant, but most importantly, to have these terms etched out in a way that you can both refer to them and have a guideline about how your relationship is going to proceed. So one of the first decisions is going to be the length of the lease. Traditional lease is 1 year, then converts to a month-to-month lease after that. That's going to give you enough time that you have a secure tenant for a period of time, but if that tenant isn't a good fit and you maybe want to raise rent, and after a year, you can reassess that and see if you want to make any changes. If you do it for too long, you're trapped in there. If you put your property at a low rent amount and lock it in there for 3 years, you're stuck for 3 years unless there's some terms that have been violated by the other party. So make sure the lease is custom to your situation, which brings me to the other issue with leases. Most landlords get online and Google leases, and they get Rocket Lawyer or some other online form production, and they get a generic lease. Well, you're not a generic person, your tenant's not a generic person, and your property's not a generic person. So that generic lease it's going to be a generic help. You're going to need specifically tailored to your situation. So if you feel confident that you can make the changes and critiques that you need to make into that, do it. Otherwise, consult with a local attorney. Bring in the lease that you have and say, hey, here's my situation, here's my age, here's where I live, this is what I want to accomplish. And they can put in terms that'll help protect you, that'll help foresee conflict down the road, address subletting, address how to terminate a lease, address pets, address security deposits, things that you might not think about because maybe this is your first time, or things that you've just never considered in the past because it's never popped up. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So make sure you get in there and get your lease squared away before you embark on it. It's going to be the most important step, starting step to make sure that you're a successful landlord and that you have a happy tenant. Tenants, it'll diffuse so many situations. If the tenant looks at the lease and says, I signed this, it's what I agreed to, it's what's going to happen. But if there's a disagreement and the lease doesn't cover it, they're going to feel like they can speak up, and you're going to have your hands up in the air saying, we never talked about this. And then the two of you need to figure it out. And that can be very difficult, especially if it's become a contentious issue with both parties. Which brings up to the security deposit. So one of the things you're going to do to protect yourself is to have a security deposit in place. That's going to be limited to the maximum of 1 month's rent. And that's going to be in place if there's damages to the property that you need to make repairs. You deduct it on a security deposit. Make sure you're keeping diligent records of the repairs that you make, because at the end of a term, the security deposit is being held in trust and should be returned to the tenant unless there have been expenses that you've had to pay as a landlord to fix things that they were responsible for, damages that they were responsible for. Not normal wear and tear, not painting the walls or fixing the carpet, but damage they're responsible for. And make sure you have your receipts and make sure you're well organized, because if they challenge that, you want to be able to send them an invoice and say, this is where the money went. And they'll say, okay. But if you just say, I took the money because of what you've done, it's not going to fly and it's not going to stand up in court if it goes to there. Which brings me to another area that I'm going to talk to you briefly before we go forward. As a landlord, one of the things you want to be considering is your own protection. Now, if you own a property, what happens to that property is ultimately your responsibility. If that property collapses on someone, or there's some structural flaw that you could have known about had you diligently inspected it, you're going to be liable for that. So make sure you're properly insured. Now, your proper insurance will only go so far. Typically, people insure their property for, catastrophic. If it burns, if it's damaged, your property insurance covers a lot. But inspect your policy and make sure your policyholder knows you're renting out, that you're not living in the property. They're going to have additional provisions in there that you're going to want. On top of that, an added layer of protection you can consider is putting your property, holding it in LLC instead of personally. Because if you're personally holding a property, and let's say your tenant has a dog there and the dog bites someone, they can sue you personally as the landowner. And so if your insurance is capped, and let's say someone's been catastrophically injured or worse, let's say there's a wrongful death and they're suing you for $1 million and you only have a $100,000 policy, you need some layer of protection to make sure they can't personally come after you and your assets. Instead, if you hold it in LLC, they're capped at whatever assets are in that LLC. So another thing to consider, again, if you have the training and experience to pursue that yourself, great. If not, consult with an attorney and see if it makes sense for your holdings. So going back to the timeline, you've gotten the tenant, you've entered into a lease, you've got a good lease that fits your needs and the tenant's needs. You have a security deposit in place in case anything's damaged. All right, what are your duties now? You're sitting back, you're getting these rent checks from your tenant. What else do you need to do? Well, you need to maintain and repair the house. You have what's called there's called a warranted habitability. The home at all times needs to be livable. And so these basic responsibilities, this is taken straight from the statute, I'll read them out. A landlord must do at least the following things: make repairs and do whatever is required to put and keep the property in a safe condition. Maintain a good working ordered all electrical, plumbing, sanitary, heating, ventilating, air conditioning, and other facilities. Okay, it goes on to say that you need to provide and maintain containers for garbage and rubbish. You need to supply water and reasonable amount of hot water at all times, unless the tenant is responsible for the water bill. Similarly, you need to supply heat at all times, unless the tenant has contracted to pay for gas. So again, things to think about when you do your initial lease. Do you want to be on the hook for water? You're going to be the hook for gas, or do you want to specifically contemplate that the tenant is responsible for providing those things? In that way, if the tenant fails to pay this water bill, fails to pay the gas bill, they can't call you in the middle of the night and say, hey, I don't have hot water and it's your fault. No, you have the responsibility to pay that. Now, we're not getting the nitty gritty right now, but there's other steps you need to take with the city, because ultimately, as the property owner, if unpaid bills, it's going to come back on you to get that turned back on. But that's something, that's something in more detail that you can consult a local attorney if you want more details on your rights and responsibilities as far as utilities. It's kind of nitty gritty. All right, so now you're doing all those things. You're maintaining a safe place. Water's working, heat's working, all the facilities are working as promised. All appliances that you mentioned in the lease are fully functional. If you provided a refrigerator, washer, dryer, they're working, and you're in a position that if they stop, something goes wrong with them, that you have handyman's ready, or you're ready yourself to come in and get that fixed. The next thing you want to do is inspections. Make sure your lease has contemplated regular inspections. One way to do it that I like is to have it tied to something simple like air filters, saying that you'll be responsible for replacing the air filters. And the nice thing about that is you can come on regular intervals, change the air filters, inspect the home, you give them proper notice. That way the home's in good condition. What you don't want to happen is rent a house out to someone. They're paying rent, so you're not thinking anything of it. And 6 to 8 months later, you find out the home has been completely destroyed. And you need to completely repurpose the home. And had you been inspecting regular intervals, you could have had signs and seen that this was coming, and you could have prevented it. You could have addressed it with the tenant. So you want to make sure that you protect your investment and you do those regular inspections. Now, you and the tenant are locked into a fixed amount of time based on the lease. Let's say you did a typical year lease, and now it's at that 13th month. But what happens is it converts to a month-to-month tenancy. So you're renting out a month at a time. Either party can give notice that they no longer want to continue on this, and you can ask the person to leave the residence and give them 30-day notice. They've got to go. Similarly, they can tell you, hey, this has been great, but we were going to move on, give you 30 days notice. They can leave without issue. Now, similarly, let's say you've had a tenant, the tenant is great. You love the tenant, they love you, it's working out awesome. And you want to raise rent because, you know, I don't know, there might be inflation down the road. I don't know, crystal ball, but you need to raise the rent. And so all you have to do is give them notice if you're outside of the terms of the lease. So if it's become month to month, you give them notice, say, starting next month, rent has to go up $50, $100. You can stay here and sign this agreement, understanding that this is the new rent, or you can leave. And so those are your options. So you can raise rent. Again, a good relationship with the tenant is going to pay dividends. You being a good landlord is going to make it a lot more smooth when issues like that come up. So now you've been renting, you've had a good tenant. Things start to get a little bumpy. The tenant wants to stay in the property, but things aren't working out too well. Let's say there's been damage to their property, or let's use the most common issue right now. They stop paying rent. They pay you rent every other month. They finally say, hey, I can't pay rent right now. And especially with the current executive orders right now with the moratorium on evictions, some tenants get bold and say, listen, I'm not gonna pay you rent right now, and I don't have to. So what are your options? Document all your correspondence with them. Again, be very professional, be understanding if they're in a financial situation. Another resource you want to direct them to, and it's in your benefit to do the footwork on this, is something called the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. It's a COVID relief program for people who can't pay rent. I almost guarantee you anyone in Gallup who's in that situation is going to qualify, and you can get some sum of money from this program. So it's to your benefit to let your tenant know about this so they can get you paid. Again, we're in a very unique time, so work with them as much as possible, keep track of the amount, and if you guys can settle on a payment, a balloon payment or what have you at the end, or once they can regain payment, great. But let's say that there's other issues. Let's say they're violating the lease. Let's say they're subletting. Let's say they're engaging in illegal conduct. Well, they're going to need to go. And so look at your lease, look at the terms of your lease, give them the proper correspondence telling them that they have to leave the premises. Now, we're not going to go into all the nitty gritty of this, but there's a matter and formula on how you do evictions in the state of New Mexico. There's 3-day notice. There's certified mail. There's steps you need to take to make sure that you do it right. So refer first to your lease, then refer to the statute. And if you intend to, if the things are becoming contentious, consult an attorney sooner than later. You'll save so much stress, so much time, and so much energy if you do it the right way at the beginning, rather than beginning some litigation on your own pro se and forgetting one of these steps. Almost every case I've been involved in which there's been a pro se litigant as a landlord, the case has been delayed due to some error on their behalf. And when I say delayed, let's say you need to evict someone and you have the laws on your side and the facts are on your side. You need to get them out of the house, but you did something improperly as far as service or as far as filing. And what should have taken 30 to 60 days might take 12 months of them living in your home, and you can't get them out and you're losing money and you're stressed out. Then you go to hire an attorney and you pay the attorney even more because they have to go back and fix everything. If you can do it right the first time, it will pay, like I'm saying, it's going to pay dividends. You're going to sleep better, and your assets can be back in your hands, generating money like it should be. All right. On that note, also, if the tenant is already left, you've got the property back, you really need to contemplate, is the juice worth the squeeze as far as a lawsuit? Is this going to be a nominal lawsuit in which you just want to win and have everyone know that you were wrong? Or do you actually have, is it likely you're going to be able to recover financially from this type of litigation? Again, it's a small town. You don't want to have a reputation as a landlord of suing everyone who's rented from you. But sometimes it's necessary. And that's why it's important to contact an attorney who can be an unbiased evaluator of the facts and say, listen, and that's what I would do as an attorney. Listen, this is not worth your time. You were both in the wrong. You make mistakes. They made mistakes. Even if you were to sue them, you're not going to get anything from it. I would move on and focus on using these resources to avoid the situation in the future and learn from it. And so again, things to consider if things aren't working out. So let's say litigation doesn't happen. The tenant leaves. They leave. Maybe it's in great terms, maybe it's not in the best terms, but they're gone. Well, on their way out, their last day there, one thing you're going to have to consider is their security deposit. Do an assessment of security deposit. Did you have to make repairs? Is there unpaid rent? What's the scenario with the security deposit? You have to be able to account for every dollar because you're holding that money in trust for them. And they have many legal rights protecting their security deposit. So, if they've broken a window, broken a door, punched holes in the walls, and you can say, hey, I went to Home Depot, here's my receipt, here's the time for labor, etc., you're going to be fine. Don't worry about it. Provide those receipts to the tenant. Be very upfront and transparent. And again, it's gonna de-escalate when they see, okay, well, he's got receipts, she's got receipts. Let's go. Let's that security deposit's gone. I know I'm not getting that back. All right. And so once you find that good tenant, ride it out as long as you can, raise rent as you need, be a good landlord, see to their needs, preempt their needs, keep your place up to date. Again, you're going to attract better tenants. You're going to have less stress by you putting extra time and money into having a beautiful home, a speedy repairs, and a safe environment. You're not going to get any lawsuits or any trouble, and you're going to have a good cash flow and a good relationship. And I've seen these many times in town pan out to be, form friendships and be a mutually beneficial arrangement between both parties. So that's really the rights and duties and timeline of a landlord at that general view of what's going to be asked of you and what you're going to need to do, and what you're going to have to keep in your mind. So as you saw, the big kind of just in review, the big points to think about is selecting the right tenant, making sure this tenant's a good fit, making sure your lease covers what you need to cover, making sure that you're maintaining the house, making sure that you're doing regular inspections, and making sure you've contemplated an exit strategy or rent raising strategy to make sure that this maintains, it stays viable as an arrangement between the parties. All right. And again, when in doubt, contact an attorney and evaluate the situation, and they can give you a third-party unbiased evaluation of, hey, this is what you most likely should do in this situation, or that's a good lease for these reasons, etc. All right, now we're going to switch gears to tenant rights and duties. So if you are a tenant, I think this will be helpful that if you're a tenant in New Mexico or a landlord, kind of hearing about what, maybe you've never rented property before, but you've been a landlord, or you're a tenant or someone who's looking to rent for the first time, or you've rented many times. First and foremost, if you're a tenant in Gallup, New Mexico, you may have found that there tends to be slim pickings. Oftentimes the best locations are taken. You're on waiting lists. You have to settle for places that aren't your first pick. The prices might be higher than you want them to be. The market fluctuates. It's been an issue, I think, in Gallup for many tenants. Many professionals that I've worked with have found the same issue where, they've got amazing, credit, amazing income, and there's just nothing available. So be diligent. Oftentimes it's who you know, get plugged in with these networks, talk to Jason, talk to other realtors who've got, they've got contacts. They know landlords, they manage properties. You're going to want to be plugged in, especially if you're intending to move here from another area. You have to lean into it. So if you know anyone who's trying to get into this, tell them to start a little earlier than they would normally anticipate, so they can start finding that good place. So let's say you're new to renting, or you have a child, you have a friend, you have whoever who wants to get into, they want to rent a place. Like, what are things that you can pass on to them, or things that you need to know? Maintain good credit. There are many reasons to maintain good credit, and one of them is for being able to rent a property you want. In addition to that, collect reference letters from old landlords. If you had a landlord and you guys had a great relationship, ask them at the end if they'd be willing to produce a letter. Do it when you move out, so that you can have it in hand, instead of trying to contact them years down the road, and have it just in a folder of references, so that when you go to rent in the future, you can show them your credit score. You can show them a reference letter from an old landlord where they can get the warm and fuzzies that you're going to be a good tenant. Also, you want proof of stable employment. The longer you've worked there, the better. You want to put the landlord's mind at ease that you have the money to rent this place and that you are responsible. I would gather all these and present them to your potential landlord with your application, whether or not they asked for them. You want to kind of be above and beyond what they're requesting, so that they know that you're diligent and you're on top of it. And frankly, you're going to be competing against other tenants. And if everyone looks the same, they're going to have to go eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Set yourself out there as someone who's got their act together and who's ready to take on this responsibility. And it's going to be a great way to start off with your landlord. Now, if you don't have those things I mentioned before, good credit score, reference letters, stable employment, you're going to need someone to co-sign. So make sure you find someone who does have those criteria, who can co-sign, and who can talk to the landlord and say, hey, I understand that I'm taking on this responsibility along with the tenant, and I'm going to sign these things along with the tenant, and then I'm going to be responsible for everything along with the tenant. That can help the landlord's mind be put at rest, knowing that if you have any financial troubles or hiccups, you can fall back on the co-signer to assist. Now, side note, anyone on this call or anyone who knows anyone who might be a co-signer, do not casually co-sign. Co-signing, whether it be for anything, but especially for a home, it's a huge responsibility to make sure that you're willing and able to take on that responsibility. You should, we hope for the best, plan for the worst. So if you're not in a position to financially take on the burden of a year lease, don't co-sign. Obviously trust the individual you're co-signing for, but it's a huge responsibility to take on. Okay. So you've gotten all those things in order. You're ready to find different places to apply. You've contacted realtors. You've looked at different ads. You've looked on Facebook. You've looked on different venues, and you found some different properties. You've applied for multiple. You've submitted applications for multiple properties that you've liked. You found the home that fits your needs the most. Now you're going to get issued a lease. Let's say your landlord says, hey, we don't need a lease. I shake your hand. You shake mine. You go, that's good. Well, call me old fashioned, but I'd like a lease. And so you get a lease. And if they don't have one, you produce one. Bring one to the table and say, I would like a lease in this case. And if they won't sign a lease, then they're not going to be a good fit for you. Just no matter how much you like that place, get a lease. And so if they more often than not, 99% of the time, they will offer you a lease and they'll say, hey, here's your lease. It might be generic. It might not be. You understand that there's two parties here. You have value. You're bringing value to the table. A lease is a contract. The two of you are coming, and it's a meeting of minds. So feel free to negotiate. If there are terms in there you don't agree with, you can ask them to be changed. Don't just think that since they are the landlord, they hold all the cards. Make sure that this lease is fair and that it fits both of your needs. And if there are specific things that you contemplate down the road, bring them up now, not later. If you think you're going to get a dog in 2 months, bring it up now. Make sure the lease addresses that. And so that you guys understand that at the outset, so that you didn't just bring home a puppy and show your kids a puppy and then you're discussing with your landlord for the first time. So contemplate things that are going on in your life, who's going to live in the home, animals, other things that you want to have in that lease to protect you and also to have an agreement to fall back on. If the parties didn't contemplate it at the onset, you want that in place to avoid conflict. So if your landlord says, hey, I don't want you to have a dog there, and say, well, the lease says I can have a dog, so that's what we agreed to. And that can defuse the situation. They say, okay, well, the landlord will say, next time I guess I'll look at that, and then you'll have the protection you need. So make sure you have it beforehand rather than when it pops up. Now, another red flag, or not really red flag, but something you need to be very conscious of, is the length of the lease. I know you found the house of your dreams and you love it very much, you want to rent it, but if someone comes to you and says, hey, here's a 5-year lease, you should probably take a look at that, because you don't know where we all have goals and we all plan ahead, but you don't know where you're going to be in 5 years. Financially, you don't know where you're going to be 5 years with your needs of your family, et cetera. So I would be hesitant, unless you were very confident about where you want to be, to enter into a lease for an extended period of time. Usually a 2-year lease is pretty much as long as I would advise. Other than that, you get trapped in a situation in which you can't get out of. That can be difficult. So 2 years maximum, usually 1-year lease. What that allows you to do is after the 1 year, it becomes month to month. And you can, of course, reapproach the landlord and say, listen, this is great. It's working out great. I love it, this place. I want to renew and do another year lease. You get locked in for another year and have that protection where they can't ask you to leave. It's like, okay, great, then get that. But the nice thing in that month to month tendency, which a lot of people prefer, is you've got the freedom that if another opportunity pops up, you need to move, you have another place you want to go to, you just let them know and say, hey, here's 30-day notice. I'd like to move out of this place, and good to go, and they'll leave. So what are your duties as a tenant? We kind of covered some of your rights that you want to preserve in your lease. What are your duties, though? Your duties are to pay rent first and foremost, and abide by the terms of the lease. But beyond that, According to the statute, beyond paying rent, the tenant's most important obligation is to keep the rental unit clean, safe, and free from unnecessary damage. The tenant is not responsible to pay for normal wear and tear on the rental unit while living in it. The tenant will, however, have to pay for repairs for any damage caused by abuse or neglect of the unit by the tenant or the tenant's guests. Also, obviously, the tenant's children and the tenant's animals, which seem to be the most destructive forces. I have children, I have animals, I can attest, they do a lot of damage to homes. So what are you going to do? You're going to make sure that you keep the place clean and safe. You're going to make sure that if there's a hole in the wall, if you punch a hole in the wall or something breaks, get it fixed, fix it yourself. Don't just leave it for the landlord to find and the landlord to deduct from security deposit. If you're not in a position to fix it yourself, obviously you can bring it to landlord's attention and understand that you're going to have to pay for that, either through your security deposit or afterwards. You're going to have to just pay for the damages you gave to the property. So don't think your security deposit is this safety blanket that's going to cover all your damages. Sometimes I'll have tenants who throw the towel and they say, this place is just damaged to hell. And I guess that's just my security deposit. It's like, well, your security deposit was $500. There's 2 broken windows. You've destroyed the carpeting. There's holes in the walls. $500 isn't going to cut it. You're going to have to pay money on top of that. So make sure you're not damaging the property. And if you do damage it, you repair it. So there's not some large bill at the end that you need to reckon with the landlord. Also, no landlord's going to want to rent to you again if you've punched holes in their walls and not fixed it. Accept responsibility for the damage you've done. Fix it yourself. You'll save money. The landlord will appreciate it. Make sure you do it right, though. That if you're making repairs to someone's property, you do it right, and they don't have to come in and re-repair it and charge you. So the biggest takeaway and the biggest lesson, responsibility I can say this will help the most is to be a good tenant. Okay, make sure you're making repairs. You're diligent on paying. You're paying on time. You're paying in the way that you guys agreed to. That obviously, if something's wrong, you bring it to the landlord's attention. But do it in the way that you guys have agreed upon. You don't need, if it's not an emergency, don't be calling at 3 o'clock in the morning to let them know that one of your doors is squeaking. Make sure that you're really bringing to them the things they need to know, because they're going to appreciate it. If something's going wrong in the house, they want to know sooner than later. If something's dripping or damaging something, don't tell them 3 or 4 months later. Tell them as soon as you notice. And in the means of communication you've decided on, whether it's email, text, phone calls, make sure that you guys know the times to talk and how to talk. Also, there's going to be inspections. Like I mentioned, the landlord section, there's going to be inspections. They're going to come and look at the house. Make sure that that everything's accessible. Don't have doors blocked. Don't have, obstacles that are concerning. Make sure that your home is presentable when they come into it and they feel confident that you're doing a good job taking care of the home. And they're going to want you to stay there as long as you want to stay there. So be a good tenant. And being a good tenant won't just assure good rates and won't just assure that you can stay in the property. It's going to assure that if something goes wrong, if something gets damaged, if there's a disagreement, the landlord's going to be so much more amicable to work with you because it's been a pleasure to work with you in the past. They're going to give you the benefit of the doubt, and you're going to be in a much better position to negotiate and resolve an issue than if you've been complaining and bad mouthing and sending angry emails through it the whole time. They're not going to want to work with you. They're going to most likely go straight to court because they know that you're not someone to be worked with. So be professional, be respectful. That goes for tenants and landlords. And you can really make a good relationship and make it work. So now let's say you wish to move out. You're within your lease and you want to move out. You have a year lease, it's 6 months in and you got to go, or it's 8 months in and you got to go somewhere else because of work, because of whatever else. Contact the landlord. Don't spring it on them. Don't just leave. Contact them and let them know the situation you're in. 9 times out of 10, you're going to have a landlord who's going to work with you. We're going to say, okay, you give them proper notice. Say, hey, I know I'm in a year lease, but I need to move out in 60 days. I have a job opportunity. I have to go. I understand I agreed to be here for a year, but I have to go. That will give them enough time to find a new tenant. You can even assist in finding a new tenant. I found someone who can take this place over when I leave. That can put you in the best position possible. Leaning into it, communicating, being transparent is going to help you, not hurt you in this situation. So make sure you let them know what you're going through and they'll be able to work with you. If you do not, and you leave mid-lease, you're responsible for those rental payments for those months you're not there. Now, there's duties of the landlord to mitigate. They need to be diligent in finding a new tenant. But you need to understand that there could be a large judgment against you if you just up and leave. You could have 6 months rent that you need to pay in damages potentially. So that's something that you need to, watch out for. And the easiest way to do that is to be amicable and work with the landlord and have an agreement and say, listen, I'm leaving early. I'm giving up my security deposit to assist or what have you. But many, many landlords will say, don't worry about it. I can find a new tenant. You've been great. You go on with your life. The place is beautiful. You can have your security deposit back. But again, it pays dividends to be a good tenant, be respectful and professional. All right. So you do move out. Let's say lease is over. You're not breaking your lease. It's time to move on. You give notice. You're month to month at that point. You give 30-day notice. Now your home is in good condition. And you contact the landlord and say, hey, I'd like my security deposit back. And they go, oh, no, we're going to keep it because we want to get new carpeting or because we want to paint the walls. Okay. So what I would say at this point, when you're detecting that there's going to be a confrontation, before you start Googling these different statutes and quoting, 5-page emails to them about how they're in violation of your constitutional rights and all this different stuff, talk to an attorney. Say, hey, just give a call, consult an attorney, say, hey, this is the situation. I have an $800 security deposit. My place is in perfect condition, and they're not giving it back. And then the attorney can say, well, let's look at this. What did they give you? What information they give you? And like, oh, they had to rip up the carpeting. So a couple things, kind of what I call left of the bag, things you can do to protect yourself. When you move into a location, to a property, take pictures of the carpet, take pictures of the walls. If you see anything that's a little iffy, maybe there's been damage that's already there, take pictures of it the day you move in. Now, when you move out, take pictures again. You do your final walkthrough, you clean it up, take pictures of the carpet, take pictures of the walls, take pictures of those areas that were already damaged. Maybe there's a light fixture that wasn't working, a fan blade that was broken, something that was already jacked up. Photograph it, document it. And if they try to put that on you, saying that this happened, maybe it was an honest mistake from them, that they didn't realize that this was damage was there. You've got documentation you can show them. And typically either between you and them, or if you get an attorney involved, and let's say, you hire a firm and we talk to them, we can resolve it. We can get your money back. It can be a very simple transaction. A strongly worded letter from an attorney is what we call it, can do wonders. But if you do need to go to court, having that documentation already in place, it's gonna be your case. It's gonna solve the issue for a judge, and you're gonna be able to not only get your security deposit back, but your attorney fees that you paid in this process can oftentimes be recovered as well. And again, that goes to your lease. Make sure your lease has provision in it that says attorney fees from the wrongful party or the party in which judgment was decided against them has to cover attorney fees. Again, because if they're in the wrong and you have to hire an attorney to get something resolved, you're going to be entitled to recovering those expenses. Okay, so you've gotten your security deposit back. There was a slight disagreement, but you resolved it. You showed them the pictures, and then now you get your security deposit back. Now you're ready to move on and rent a new place and do this cycle again. One thing I would like to address, however, is let's say you had to leave early. There was a disagreement about something. There was damage to the property, alleged damage to the property. They're blaming you. It's not resolved. And you get served with legal papers. Let's say you need to move out of state. You need to move. You need to do whatever. But you get served with legal papers and you just think, you know what? I don't have time for this. I'm not going to participate. Now, you'll get a judgment against you. It's called a default judgment. If you don't participate once you've been served with these papers, they're going to get a default judgment against you. Whatever they're alleging, let's say they're alleging $10,000 worth of damage. They're going to have a judgment of $10,000 against you because you didn't take the time to answer their complaint. So make sure that you answer the complaint. You can obviously go pro se, go to court yourself, but many, many rights and laws in the books and defenses that are available that you're not going to be necessarily keyed up on. So I would, again, strongly advise consulting with an attorney or retaining an attorney if you've been sued by a landlord to preserve your rights or to negotiate a settlement. It can be much easier to have an attorney go in there and talk to the landlord or their attorney and say, hey, we're going to settle it in this way, rather than going to court and dealing with all this stuff. So again, if you get served with legal papers or you need to go to court, please talk to an attorney sooner than later. Don't contact an attorney when you have court the next day and you got served and you filed nothing and now you have your first appearance. It's going to be more expensive and more difficult and harmful. So early and often address these issues rather than later where it's much more expensive and problematic. All right, so wrapping up with landlords and tenants, I'd say the most important lesson here is remember it's a small town. If you've been evicted as a tenant and there's a court record, it's going to be very hard for you to rent in the future, especially from a good and diligent landlord. Similarly, if you're a landlord and you've been suing every tenant and taking their security deposits, you're going to get blasted on Facebook, you're going to get blasted on other social media and other places, and you're not going to be able to bring in the type of tenant you want. So make sure that both landlords and tenants are being respectful, that they know the rules, they know the rules and the statutes we've provided, they know the rules in their own lease. Too many times people don't even read their own lease, know what's in it. So make sure it's custom to the situation for your tenant and for your landlord. And if you work together, good landlords and good tenants can make the dream work. Just remember to be professional and respectful, and you're likely going to be able to work through any hiccups without ever even consulting with an attorney. And that's going to be on the two parties to work together. So again, I hope this has been helpful. And if we have any general questions, we can address them now. I'm not going to be able to get into any specifics or nitty gritty, but if we have any questions, we can address them. And finally, I'd like to say that there's an important resource for both landlords and tenants. New Mexico Legal Aid has provided a guide. It's called the New Mexico Legal Aid Renter's Guide. It's available at newmexicohealth.org. But if you just Google New Mexico Legal Aid Renter's Guide, it's going to be a comprehensive guide to renting and to being a landlord and being a renter. Sorry. And from both perspectives, and it's broken down in plain English instead of code language. So it's very helpful. If you're looking to be a landlord or your current landlord, I'd suggest you leaf through it and have it at the ready in the event that these things pop up, so you're properly educated and prepared to handle them in the right way to avoid conflict and wasted money and wasted stress. All right, well, that's all I've got. If there's any, like I said, if there's any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Well, Jeremy, it's Jason. I just want to let you know that was a great presentation. We've got a couple of people on the Zoom, but I've also got some people on the other feed that we have coming in here. And what a great presentation. Joy, William, do you guys have any specific questions for Jeremy while we've got him?
This is Bill Bright. I do, Jason.
All right.
He was mentioning a number of things about discrimination federally, and that's obvious. But what about children? Some landlords, just because of problems, sort of discriminate if people have children. Of course, it could be an issue. What do you think?
Well, I remember distinctly from law school, there was a Supreme Court case having to do with this. And the justice said, he pretty much waxed poetic about how grandparents, for instance, have done their time. They've raised their children. If they want to live in an area without children, they should have that constitutional right. So for damage to property, as well as if you have like let's say you rent a multiple units and you want it to be a certain group, like if you want it to be elderly or single people, et cetera, it's going to be there's a thin line there. You don't want to actively say, in your advertisement, no children. I don't want any children here. But if, so one of the provisions is family status. So if people are married or unmarried, what I would caution is this: if someone says, I have a child, obviously you can discern if that's a good fit for your property. Some properties aren't child friendly, and you can just say that's not a good fit. I'm sorry, your situation is not a good fit. I wouldn't go as far as to say like you have a child and therefore I will not rent to you. So I guess the legal answer is it depends, but child age in that age is not a factor. So you can actually discriminate for based on child, but I would not advise being explicit in that type of discrimination. But again, it's a factor that you can use to discern whether or not this is a good fit for your property. And constitutionally, you can discern based on the age, like childhood. It's a factor you can discern on. Yeah.
Anything else, Bill?
Yes, we understand on these federal guidelines, at least on the federal level, there's a cliff, 3 apartments or less, or 4 apartments or less doesn't qualify for any oversight. Is that still in the law where it depends on the size and number you have? Little mom and pop places don't really qualify for federal oversight in terms of tenant law. Is that true?
Well, there's a couple things there. Now, when you say don't qualify, there's certain, are you saying like the federal law doesn't apply?
Doesn't apply, yes.
I think there's a New Mexico Human Rights Act, which is going to shadow a lot of those policies. So federal law is going to apply, like you said, to certain, commercial, residential scenarios. But there's a New Mexico Act that's largely shadows and is largely identical to the federal statute. So you're going to run afoul of those either way. I mean, long story short, there's no justifiable situation in which you should be articulating or contemplating discrimination based on the factors there. So where people get into, I mean, the biggest pickle here is, whether it be, a moral issue, whether it be just, good old fashioned discrimination in which they're not comfortable renting to certain people. Obviously you can make a judgment on someone you want to rent to, but you should never be explicitly in an application or in correspondence saying based on your race, sexual orientation, et cetera, disability, I'm not going to rent to you. So, it's never relevant to consider or include. So I definitely would not push the envelope and say, well, technically, federal law doesn't apply here. So I'm going to go ahead and tell X, Y, and Z person that I'm not going to rent to them because they are X, Y, Z person.
Of course, we're okay with non-smoking units, the way we put it right in the agreement. That seems to be working out. We extend that a little bit by no smoking on the property, our premises, because what happens, we have apartments, they're triplexes. If someone steps outside, they're not smoking in the unit, but the neighbor next door is breathing secondhand smoke. So we've been putting that in there and kind of emphasizing it. Is that okay?
Of course, yeah. I mean, you really have a wide latitude. You have a wide latitude of things you can include and agree to that can far extend past what's included in statute. So smoking, another thing I've seen, which is sensitive areas with marijuana. Marijuana is it's medicinally legal in New Mexico. So you're gonna want something in your lease that captures, you can capture no use of this substance. And so some of those issues can come from someone being like, well, this is my medication. You're saying I can't use my own medication in my own home. But again, by saying no smoking or ingesting or possessing this substance in the home, which is, because it still violates federal X, Y, and Z, you can work around those things. But to get to your question, there's no issues with saying that this cannot be used on the premise. Again, there's very colorful reasons for that, as far as a cigarette butt falling. It's a very reasonable provision. Cigarette butt falling on some grass could start a fire. Like you said, smoke going back into the building. As long as it's in the lease, it's not an issue.
We need to hear a little bit more about, especially with what's going on with a special session, about marijuana smoking. And when we say smoking in there and don't qualify anything else, it would seem to indicate any kind of smoke coming from a person's apartment or outside to someone else breathing it. So it seemed to include marijuana, but should we be more specific?
I would just say if it's a concern illegal activity, you're gonna have a provision for illegal activity anyway. If illegal activity is occurring on the premise, you actually, as a landlord, some situations you have a duty to report, among other things. So it's something I would address, and I don't think it's problematic at all. Some people don't mind, but if your main concern is just smoke damage to the property, I would say no smoking of any substance. I mean, if you specify, it's how things are drafted. So if you specify, no smoking tobacco, then they can smoke other things, right? So I would just say no smoking on the premises to be safe, and that's going to cover you for smoking any substances.
Frankly, our biggest problem is alcohol, and that's really tough to put into a rental agreement because, and I say it's too bad because that's really the substance that creates the violence and the holes in the wall and domestic violence in an apartment. But it's really tricky to say anything about drinking alcohol. And so we just don't know where to go there.
Well, on that, like we said, there's provisions for illegal conduct within the home. So you can include, without getting directly to alcohol, well, obviously you can have, no alcohol. You can have a prohibition in your lease if you'd like, say no alcohol in the home. That's pretty strict, and I think a lot of tenants wouldn't appreciate that for a myriad of reasons. But you can kind of get to the source of what you're concerned about by actually specifying illegal conduct. Illegal conduct occurs in the premises. It'll be in violation of the lease, to include, property damage, domestic violence, etc. So some of the unfortunate fruits of the alcohol, you can be ready when they occur. And if the concern is preventing them and having a deterrent, and more importantly, let's say this is happening and your tenant's not a good fit, you then have a mechanism to properly evict them under the terms of the lease.
Wow. Well, some great information again, Jeremy. One of the things, just coming from the other feed that I had here, why is it so important to have that written lease agreement? Because there's a lot of people that kind of do the spit in the hand and shake and your word is good. Why is it so important for a tenant to protect themselves with that written lease agreement?
Well, it's going to serve to diffuse many, many situations. The problem with oral agreements is we all know the game of telephone when you're a kid. As people say things, repeat things, maybe you heard something, maybe they heard something, maybe you don't have a true meaning in the mind, and some of the more important details, they have an idea of what it means and you have an idea of what it means, but it's not in writing and it's left to both your interpretation. And then you're left with, that's not what you said, which is what's the most common thing with these oral agreements is that's just not what you said. Legally, for certain rights to be enforceable, they need to be in writing. We're not going to the parole evidence rule, other issues there, but you're going to want it in writing to protect yourself. And more importantly than just protecting yourself, having a written lease is going to resolve, it's going to prevent conflict from escalating. There's going to be the beginnings of a disagreement as to what your rights and duties are. And then what's going to happen, it happens every time your landlord said something to you or you said something to your landlord. What do? You run to your lease and you read it and read it and read it and you go, oh, shoot. Okay, they're right. All right. Or, before you even contact them, you're like, wait a minute. What were they supposed to do? And you read through your lease and then you get to the part where it says you're responsible for the maintenance of the refrigerator and the stove. And you're like, okay, that's what I agreed to. And so before there's even conflict, you understand what you have to do. They understand what they have to do. It's rules to play by. You don't want to be in a relationship like this without rules to play by, or every time something pops up, you guys have to make it up from scratch and you both want to protect yourselves. And it's going to be very hard to come to an agreement on the fly.
Piggybacking on that, why you want to have that lease agreement in place. The other feed had a couple of questions about security deposit and damages. And, I think this is something that falls under both landlords and tenants, the understanding how, when, and what process documents that any seizure of any portion of the security deposit. Can you just illustrate that for us? I mean, if whether I'm a tenant or I'm a landlord, there's a process that really needs to be followed. Can you give us a little more insight on that?
Of course. So, like I said, when you take a security deposit, it's being held in trust. So the landlord takes that money from the tenant, but it's still the tenant's money, meaning they need to preserve it. They're not supposed to commingle it. They're supposed to have it at the ready for a reckoning at any time. And they're going to get into big trouble if they're commingling or they spent the money, the money's gone. They really want to hold it separate and make sure it's being preserved and held intact. Now, when it comes to damages, so tenants pay the money to the landlord, landlord's holding it. The tenant knows that that money's there and that if they need to leave, that money's still accessible. Now, once damages occur, let's just make it simple. There's a broken window. You broke a window. Okay, here are your options as a tenant. You can fix that broken window and you'd be given an opportunity to fix that broken window yourself. And if you fix that broken window and it's as good or better than it was, the landlord is not entitled to any damages. I mean, I recently worked with a landlord who there was damage done to the property. There's scratches on appliances and some damage to the wall. And but they didn't make repairs. And they wanted to take the security deposit money. And I said, well, you need to make the repairs until you've actually expended the money to fix the damages. You're not entitled to take that money. So it's not I will take the security deposit to deal with this later. No. Go in there, make the repairs, have the invoices from Walmart or Home Depot for whatever you had to purchase, have the the invoice from the contractor or the labor if you did it yourself, then have that prepared with a little write-up, and then show that this costs $200 and $200 was taken out of security deposit. And so you need to have a reckoning to make sure that you can have like a ledger showing. And then the other thing important with that too is that once it gets to zero, then it starts going to the negative, because you need to start recovering these damages. You keep track. Don't think as a landlord, oh, the security deposit's depleted, I guess I'm just paying for all this damages. It goes, no. Preserve that so that if you need to recover from them, and they understand as well what the damage they've done and the cost that's associated with it.
You know,
Jason? Jason?
one other thing, I'm going to step on Bill here for a second. That reconciliation of that security deposit, there's a time frame on that too. Am I correct? Because my understanding that some landlords like to play the game where they take 6 months to get the quote unquote security deposit reconciled back to the tenant. But there's a time frame on this reconciliation as well. Am I correct?
There is. The statute has a specific time frame in which you need to do that reconciliation and provide notice to the tenant. I believe it's 30 days. I don't have that provision in front of me right now, but I could look to the statute and find it. Best practices is going to be to do it, in real time, right? As you make the repairs. And especially, here's a situation you don't want to find yourself in as a landlord. The tenant's moved out. You never gave a security deposit back. You never made the repairs. 6 months have gone by and you've never done anything. You're going to want all of this to be done within the first 30 days, or you're going to face the risk that you're not going to be able to take the security deposit. And they're going to be able to come to you in court and say, listen, I want my security deposit back. And you go, there are damages to the home. It's like, well, this is 6 months later. The time frame you had to make to notify me, because you have a notification requirement that the damages were done, and then to actually claim my security deposit, that time has passed. And now my security deposit's mine, regardless of the damages that were done. So again, I don't have that specific time frame, but you're going to want to do it. I would say best practices, you're going to notify them within 14 days of them exiting, and you're going to want every repair and invoice done and complete within that 30-day window.
Right. Bill, you had something else?
Jason, one of the common scenarios that happened here is people just don't pay it the first of the month, and we don't hear anything halfway through. They're moving out, and they say, well, use my security deposit for the last month's rent or half of the month's rent. And then we do that, but then we're left with not a whole lot left for repairs. So what's the definition? What's the legal, security deposit include shorting on rent? Can you do that? And
If parties agree that the security deposit be converted to a rent payment, that's not an issue. But you understand, like you've experienced and like you're hitting on, if you do that maneuver, I mean, the writing's on the wall. You've just paid that. You've taken that money and you've made the concession almost that that's all you're going to get, that there's not more money coming, that if there's repairs that need to be made, you're going to be paying for those out of pocket and you're not going to have money to cover that. So you're going to need, if a tenant approaches you and says, hey, for next month rent, can you use my security deposit? That's a huge red flag. And you need to start immediately assessing the situation as to potential exit strategies, how to mitigate loss, how to make sure your ducks are in the row, that if you need to go to court and recover to evict this individual and to recover the maximum amount possible, how you're going about that. But if anything, that should just be a red flag. Obviously, if you agree to it and say, you can refuse that. You can say, no, that is for damages. I'm not going to accept that in satisfaction of rent payments. You need to pay me rent payments. I mean, if that makes any sense that you want to do that, you can, but you need to make sure you're coming at it with an intact strategy. Because if you compromise and you come to an agreement as into satisfaction, let's say you say to them, hey, they say, take my security deposit in lieu of rent payments this month, and you agree to it. Well, if you've agreed to that and you weren't really paying attention to the type of verbiage you used, you might have just agreed that rent for that month is $500 instead of $800, and that they're now in satisfaction. So words mean things, and texts means things, and emails mean things. So make sure you're paying attention. Once you start to get into that wheeling and dealing, you've gone off the track a little bit, and you should be assessing how we're going to wrap this up, because it's becoming unstable.
Right. Wow. Well, Jeremy, I am very grateful, and I'm going to ask you to do me a favor, Jeremy, if you will scroll over the participants and just make me the host again. That way I can let our next presenter, which is coming up, which is Ken Yellen from OneTrust Mortgage, talking about first time home buyer zero down and near zero down loan programs. But ladies and gentlemen, and I've got a handful on the other feed as well. We've had about 30 people tune into this. And Jeremy, I got to tell you, what a great presentation. I am so grateful. And I know that this was great information for many tenants and landlords. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jeremy Gay from Advocate Law Center. Jeremy is an attorney, and he can be reached at 505-722-2055, just if you have questions. And again, I have used Jeremy and continue to use him for some legal things that I need to get taken care of and such, including setting up family trusts. And Jeremy has been a wealth of information. Jeremy, you have made the Marine Corps proud. Thank you so much for your contribution to the community. Having tenants and landlords protected as we're going through this kind of housing shortage in Gallup is such an important part of making it a less hostile housing environment. And the presentation you provided today was just absolutely insane. I am so grateful for you.
Thank you. You guys have a good day.
All right. Take care, sir. Bye-bye. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Jason with Coldwell Banker High Desert Realty again, and I am thrilled to see that our first presentation there with Jeremy Gay from Advocate Law Center was a great presentation, I believe. And I wanted to let you guys know that he just gave us the presentation on the Uniform Owner Resident Relations Act from the state of New Mexico. Our next presenter today is going to be Ken Yellen from OneTrust Mortgage. Ken is going to be giving us a presentation on the, excuse me, Ken, I'm drawing a blank here, on the zero down and near zero down programs. One of the things that came out of yesterday's presentations was that you need a lot of down payment money to be able to get into a home. And Ken actually knows that that's not entirely true. So I'm going to turn this over to Ken Yellen. Ken, we've got a couple of people on the Zoom feed. I've also got a handful of people on our second feed, which is funneling through Facebook. As those questions pop up through Facebook, I will, try to divert them over to you and such. But right now, Ken, I am actually going to make you the host. So if you want to share your stuff and all that, you will be able to do so. And I will sit down, shut up, and pay attention to exactly what you're teaching us. And I'll let you operate. How does that sound?
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you. Well, good morning. My name is Ken Yellen. I'm with OneTrust Home Loans, New Mexico, NMLS number 779952. It's important to have that quality number out there. So this morning I want to talk about a couple different programs that can affect us or help us buy a house with very low down or actually no money down on one program. The first one I'm going to talk about is a program called New Mexico Finance Authority, or MFA. And the MFA program has an excellent program called First Home. And the First Home program is a program where you basically need about $500 down into the transaction in order to buy a house. It's a great program. One of the aspects of it is you must have a credit score of at least 620. As far as it goes, though, the 620 credit score and above is great. This is exclusively for first-time home buyers, used to finance single-family properties only. It can be a manufactured home on permanent foundation. As I mentioned before, requires $500 contribution from the buyer's own money. You can't borrow the money. You can't get a gift from family members. It's got to come out of your pocket. You have to have home buyer counseling, pre-purchase home buyer counseling, which is really excellent. The home buyer counseling goes through various different budgets and how to make sure that you can continue to make the payment on a house and not have problems and issues with that. So it's an excellent course to take with that. Now, again, the first-time home buyer definition is somebody that has not owned a home or occupied a home in the last 3 years. So let's say if you were married and you were not on title on that house, but your spouse was, then you couldn't buy a house with a program. You'd have to go with a different program, which is possible. But if you have not owned or had any ownership of a home in the last 3 years, then you can be on this program itself. As I said, only single family homes. We can use what's called alternative credit sometimes with the program. And alternative credit might mean that we might get 12 months worth of proof that you pay Netflix on time, or car insurance, or maybe your health insurance, or some other thing that you pay on a monthly basis. But it's an excellent first-time home buyer program. It does have income limits, which we have to pay attention to. So sometimes you might find that you don't qualify for that because you make too much money. In the Gallup area, if you're a single person, the income limit's $60,400. But if you're a family of 3 or more, the income limit's $69,460. So that's total combined household income limit. But it does include, let's say if mom lives in a house and collects Social Security. So it'd be, maybe husband, wife, incomes plus mom. So we've got to look at everybody's income that's going to be in the property itself. So it's an excellent program to get started with. I have some more notes over here. I got to refer to my notes real quick. Here we go. So the program itself is a combination of an FHA first mortgage, which requires 3.5% down payment. But the mortgage insurance, the MFA comes in and will do a second mortgage up to $8,000 over 30-year payment, which the maximum is going to be about $48 a month, but up to $8,000. So you can use that $8,000 towards your down payment of 3.5%. Now, if you do find that the seller is willing to pay some of your closing costs and prepaids, and I'll talk about that in a minute, then it is a possibility you can buy the house and basically only need $500 into the property. I do want to touch on a little bit about what is prepaids and closing costs. So a prepaid is money that is paid to make sure you have tax insurance that are paid for the property on a monthly basis. So upfront at closing, you're going to need a full year's of homeowners insurance. You're going to need at least 2 more months additional homeowners insurance and at least 3 months of property taxes. And those are considered prepaids. Closing costs are all negotiable, but the closing cost, the MFA program does have some what they call points or fees. And then your other closing costs can be whatever the title company might charge. So the title company is going to charge you maybe half the closing fee, or title policy fees, or recording fees, and that sort of thing. So when you get started with the whole loan program, what I like to do is normally is take the application and get it started. And just as a point of view, my website is www.kenyellin.com. That's KENYELIN.com. But if you put in an application with me, what I can do is I can go ahead and see what you pre-approved for based on your income and your credit scores. And then we can do an estimate. And part of the estimate is going to show all the closing costs and those prepaids I just talked about. And that in itself, you'll be able to have a perception of whether or not, if you buy a house about $125,000, then the MFA first and second mortgage usually covers the majority of the closing costs and prepaids. If you buy $175,000 to $200,000, you're going to wind up coming out of your pocket with some money, or seeing if you can get the seller to participate with paying some of your closing costs. As Jason will tell you, the market right now with the sellers, just in a great position as a seller, there are a lot of them not paying those closing costs. The beauty is, though, you can get a gift for those closing costs from a family member, or different aspects. There are places that give grants and that sort of thing. So there's an opportunity to get that also, which would help you overall between either the gift from a family member or a grant, or the seller paying the closing costs. Like I said, but with the MFA program, as long as you don't exceed the income limits, there's great opportunity to buy a really nice house in today's market itself. Let's see. Might check my notes real quick and step all the things real quick. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything I wanted to share with you about that program. There is a website. It's a long website. If you email me, or if you do go ahead and apply, I'll share the website with you for the first home program. And that website will give you a lot more details about what I'm discussing right now. Something that's part of the loan that we have to talk about, most people don't understand, is something that's called mortgage insurance. So unless you put 20% down, then mortgage insurance is required on your loan. And mortgage insurance is a fee you pay to the lender to make sure that you don't get foreclosed on. Now, under FHA program with the FHA MFA combination, FHA sets that mortgage insurance fees and costs. And that'll be part. So when you make your house payment in the future, it'll be the principal and the interest, the taxes and insurance, the mortgage insurance, and the second payment itself for the MFA second mortgage itself. That pretty much covers anything. Jason, is there any particular questions going on right now at all?
No, I'm not popping up. Of course.
Sorry, guys.
What is that noise in the background?
That's my big dogs barking at nothing.
But
Sorry about that.
actually, right now, and we're going to let the second feed catch up to us here a little bit. But Ken, I think the biggest question people may be having right now, so what you're telling us off of this first section, and I'm sorry I had to go grab a cup of coffee here right at the beginning, but what you're telling us is that there's a perception out there, a myth out there, that you need to put 20% down in order to buy a house. And this first program that you gave us, which was New Mexico MFA, you're telling me that I don't need to put 20% down, which is really quite remarkable. What's the value, Ken? I mean, buying a house now, I might have to use the MFA program. I might have to do private mortgage insurance. I might have to have this second mortgage from MFA. But why would I want to take on that responsibility now, as opposed to continuing to save in order to get, let's say, 20% down?
Well, I don't know about you, but life is expensive and it's very, very hard to save 20% down, especially if you're looking at a $200,000 house. I mean, that's $40,000 plus any closing costs. The fact of the matter is that 20% down is great if you've got it. 20% avoids mortgage insurance. But that's the only advantage. Maybe you might get a little better interest rate or maybe a few other things. But the fact of the matter is that there is absolutely no reason why anybody needs to come up and sit back and save that much money. I mentioned the first time home buyer program. MFA has another program called Next Home where, they've got a different program, but it's very similar down payment situation. And your income limit is $91,000, which is sufficient for a great amount of people. So we could definitely get in a program. But, Jason, you're absolutely right. There's no reason for people to wait. If somebody waited to come up with 20% down, the great example is let's say somebody started 10 years ago trying to come up with 20% down. They could have bought a house in the Gallup area that today might go for $200,000. They could have bought it for maybe $150 or less. So they're losing out on the opportunity to gain equity. One of the greatest things about owning a home is definitely going to be that, number one, you get a tax advantage. You get this tax deduction that you don't have to pay as much taxes. Comes back, which is nice and great, but that's not the main key. The main key is that overall down the road, you're going to build equity in a house. If you bought a house 30 years ago in Gallup, I bet that house you could have bought it for maybe $60,000 and it's worth $200,000. I mean, that's building your retirement. That's building your future. That's building your, if you need to move from a different state, then you've got money out of the house and opportunities. So waiting is really a mistake. And also, what's very important is that the interest rates are going to go up. Now, I don't really know how old I am. You can tell I got a couple of gray hairs here, but I've been doing this mortgage thing for over 30 years. And when I started in the mortgage business, the interest rates were over 11%. And the payment difference between 11% and maybe what's 3 1/8 right now with MFA rate, and that's not including the APR and that sort of thing, but it's just the basic rate, is a massive difference in a monthly payment. Well, right now, the market is going up and rates are going up. We enjoyed lower rates for a long time. And like I said, 3.125% rate is still extremely low. But the fact of the matter is 6 months ago, the rates were 2.5. So they're definitely creeping up. And what happens is to buy that same, let's say you buy a house, 150,000. Well, now the payment's gone up $40, $50 a month between the two different rates. And so it's not as affordable. So you have to wind up buying less of a house based on what you qualify for. The time is of the essence to get the house now. I know shopping for homes is really difficult right now, but there are, sellers that are willing to sell and buyers that want to buy. And I think that both parties will come together, but I think it's a wonderful. And if you wait, you're just missing out on an opportunity for yourselves and to gain equity in the future and have a much lower payment.
Well, and Ken, you mentioned a great thing here, building equity. And if you guys really want to see how quickly equity is going to build, this is for the public information here. Between 1 and 2 p.m. today, I actually have a presentation called Maximizing Your Real Estate Investment. And, in that presentation, I'm going to show how quickly you can build equity. For most people, if you're going to buy a $150,000 home, in just 5 years, you're going to gain about $34,000 of equity. And, I think that's what you're getting at, Ken, is for me to save in 5 years, $34,000 of equity, that means I would have to save roughly $600 a month just to be able to get that kind of equity position. And most of us don't have that additional $600 of going to sale per month. So or going to, into the bank account every month. So that means that we can use our home as a leverage position to be able to save money faster, even though I might have a mortgage insurance or a second small mortgage on this property.
Absolutely. And, you're going to find that I heard what you said. I read that rumor a couple of times in the mortgage industry that people are expecting to have to put 20% down. Like I said, I've been doing this 30 years. MFA created programs. I think it was 25 years or so ago. But the most at the point in time years ago when I first started was maybe you need 3.5% down. So we're talking that rumor has got to be squelched. That's just, it's sad that people are sitting back thinking, hey, I can't do this. I do want to circle back around to people and their credit scores. You and I have both worked with a lot of people that in the past, they're sitting at home right now thinking, well, my credit score is 580 and I really, I just can't buy a house, or, I had a mistake, or, I had bankruptcy a few years ago or something of nature. That's okay. We could set a plan. If somebody's out there right now and has credit score issues or maybe an old bankruptcy or something, I had a customer recently that didn't want to buy a house because they thought they had to have 10 years after a bankruptcy. That's certainly not true at all. I mean, exactly. Yeah, you're holding up number 2, but FHA is correct. Number 2, so you had a bankruptcy a couple of years ago and you have recovered and you've gone out and reestablished credit, then you don't have to wait to buy a house. So there's opportunities upon opportunities. There's no reason to rent. Rent payments are very high. And there's a lot of people that are qualified to buy a house. I mean, I can imagine, hey, I'm paying, $1,000 a month in rent. Well, what's that going to buy me in a house? And then my house. And now I can work in the backyard. I can fix things up. I can change things. I don't have anybody's permission to do these kind of things. So it's really exciting owning your own home. Yes, it's got a little bit more responsibility, but man, what an opportunity. As you said, building equity and building the future. My parents are a funny example. They bought a house almost 20 years ago, and my dad's, thinking, I don't have much equity. And I looked it up for him, and he's in Portland, Oregon, and he didn't realize he built $250,000 in equity in the last, some odd years. That's a lot of built up. I mean, we don't know what the market's going to do. It might stay flat. It might not go up, but right now the market is going up and it's well. And, but even if you waited 30 years, like I said before, the house in Gallup you might have bought for $50,000 20 years ago is now worth $200,000. So it takes time sometimes, but what an opportunity. But if you find yourself in a situation where your credit's not the best thing to do is go online, put an application. Again, my website is kenyellin.com, and that's Yellin was spelled with Y-E-L-I-N. But go online, apply, and I'll pull your credit report. It won't cost you any money. And I can see if you're in a situation. And if you're not in a good situation, I'll send you a quick email or phone call. We'll talk, and I'll just let you know, look, hey, you probably might want to get some credit repair done. Or, if you go out and get a couple credit cards, that's a good example to talk real quick. I mean, people go out and charge with these credit cards. Well, they're trying to reestablish credit, and they'll go out maybe to Capital One and get a $500 limit, but they'll charge it up to $400. Well, that's not building your credit. That's actually hurting your credit. You got to keep that limit to 33% of the $500. So you keep the credit card about $125, but never pay it off, pay it down and just cycle that, get 2 or 3 credit cards. I've watched people credit scores go from 580 to 620, 640 in 3 or 4 months, simply because they open up a new card and are using it. It's not people looking at things anymore. It's just a computer model, and you can fool the computer by just doing simple steps. And so we can definitely help you with that. Our goal is obviously as a team with Jason is to really help people out there get into their home and set up. If it takes 3 or 4 years as a team for us to help you get into a property, that's okay. There's going to be houses down the road. There's going to be programs down the road, and we can help you do that. But, today's the first day to get started. Don't be afraid of it. I know a lot of people are afraid of calling me. Speaking of which, if you want, 505-220-2968. 505-220-2968 is my phone number. You can give me a call, we can talk, but most people are afraid to talk. They don't want to be disappointed. But if you do the online application, you're really not risking that much. And I think we can really help you find an opportunity to go ahead and get set up for a home loan.
Yeah. Well, talking about the credit scores, we're going to have a presentation later this afternoon, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. Dale Diedrich from First Financial Credit Union is coming, and he's going to teach us how to read a credit report and how to improve and maintain your credit score. So even if there are obstacles, our extended group, as we're coming through the Gallup Housing Summit, representatives like yourself, Joy Striley, Caliber Home Loans, and Dale Diedrich are coming together really for the general good of the community to try to be sure that everybody has this opportunity to be a homeowner. Okay, so we've talked about MFA. We kind of went off into the weeds a little bit. What else do you got for me today, Ken?
Well, I just touched on a little bit of the program called Next Home. So let's say right now you do own a home and you have just a little bit of equity and you're going to sell it and buy another property. Well, the program called Next Home does allow us to go up to, like I said, the income limit of $90,000, which is great. Next Home, you could own a home before. Maybe you move from one city and move into Gallup. So you don't have to be a first-time home buyer, and which is great. And the Next Home program is a little different. It gives you a grant of money, or here's some free money. You have to live in a house for a certain amount of time. Again, I'll share the link to the website so you can read more details so I don't misquote anything. But if you live in a house a certain amount of time, they're going to give you up to 3% of a down payment of the house. That's free money. What a great program to have. The rate on that's a little bit higher. Some of the details are higher, but it's overall it's a really great program. And like I said, the income limit's $91,000. So that's a lot of extra money. The other program I definitely want to touch on, which was my go-to program before COVID started, was the USDA home loan program. I love USDA. The flexibility has tightened up quite a bit. You have to have a really strong portfolio, but the USDA loan is a zero down loan program. It's an excellent program. So if you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of money, but you can get into the property, it's 100% home financing. You can you basically finance the mortgage insurance into the loan. Speaking of which, their mortgage insurance is a whole lot less than the MFA loan mortgage insurance program. The seller, of course, can pay towards your closing costs. Flexible credit guidelines. Like I said, it's very tight income restrictions, but it's an excellent program. It's a conventional loan. I've put a lot of people in that loan program, and it's just really a great program. But you have to find that you have to have, high credit scores and that sort of thing. So before COVID, it was great. They go down to 620 or below. Now they say they'll go down to 620, but I've tried a couple of times, and it's really not a great program that we could work on under those parameters itself. But it's a great program overall. And the rates are very reasonable. It's a good deal itself. Excuse me, get some water there.
What else do you got for us today, Ken?
Well, one of the things that's really, really important that I want to touch on is kind of outside the box a little bit is the do's and don'ts. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll get involved and they'll get out there and they'll say, okay, well, I want to buy a house, and they'll start, paying off debt or doing this or doing that. And the fact of the matter is that that's really is a mistake. I've got a nice list of items that I'll send you when you're looking to go ahead and buy the house. part of that list is going to be, don't pay off credit card debt maybe, or don't, definitely don't go out and charge. A lot of people, loan process, they'll be all excited and they'll go, okay, I'm going to go out and buy a new washer and dryer, just right before closing. That creates new debt. And that's one thing that's horrible, because we have to count all the debt that's in the loan itself. So, if you go out to, I don't know, places to buy washer and dryers right off the top of my head, but if you go out and buy a new washer, a new refrigerator, say, okay, because I really want to have that while my house is almost complete. We're about a week away from closing. I want to have a new refrigerator. That's a horrible mistake. So some of the things, don't change jobs. Don't apply for new credit card. Don't take any store credit card debt we just talked about. Don't make any large deposits or cash into your bank account. That's one of the biggest problems that people do, is they go ahead and let's say their cousin owed them, $500 or $1,000. Well, they want to use that money for down payment. So get the cousin to pay them back, and it's cash, and I can't track that. So don't do any of that kind of stuff. The one we laugh about is people making large purchases. They'll go out there and like, well, I just, I bought a new car. You did what? You don't want to buy a new car. That's a horrible thing to do in our loan process itself. Some of the other things I wanted to touch on real quick. Don't max out your credit cards, we talked about. Don't close any accounts. That's one I was looking for. How to go to my cheat sheet. Don't close any accounts. A lot of times people think, they know how to fix their credit. And that's why it's important for you to apply online and for us to look at things and analyze it all together. Because if you close an account, it actually drops your credit score. Now, if you pay it down is one thing, that might be good, but don't close it. Don't dispute anything in your credit report. And of course, don't go on any kind of a spending spree. That's a bad thing, but no large deposits. If family's going to give you a gift, then let's talk about it. I'll show you how to do that. There's all kinds of things that we have to control. And it's so important for you to communicate with me to make sure that we don't do anything during the loan process. Jason and I have had several customers that thought they were doing just the right thing, and right before closing, they'll do something, postpones our closing almost a month if we can get the seller to agree to hold off that long to fix things. So let's communicate. Let's make sure that we're doing everything that is going to make sure that you win overall in the overall transaction itself.
Great. Okay, and again, just great information. I think what we're really doing through this effort here, and you piggybacked right up onto Jeremy's time, which was great. But what we're really doing in this effort here is trying to dispel the myths. Unfortunately, if you go into the Google machine and you type in, buying a home, there's like 9,000 pages of advice and information that's available. And what that actually creates is an overload of information. So one of two things happens. Either number one, people get scared because there's so much information that they're like, there's no way in hell I'm doing this. Or number two, they get information that isn't specific to them and their situation. And then they start trying to make decisions off of like the 20% down requirement that we kind of talked about. The real value of this right here that we're talking about is you have to find a trusted advisor to be able to pull some information in, look at your specific information. That way you can be set on the path that's really going to make sense for you. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And, sometimes people will apply with 3, 4, 5 different mortgage companies thinking they're going to get better rates and better terms. Well, under the MFA program, I just want to add in that MFA sets the rates. So no matter what lender, which you should work with Ken Yellen, of course, but no matter what lender you work with, they all have the same exact rates for these programs that I'm talking about. Now, the USDA has a different rate structure, so that's different. But when it comes to MFA has a website, and you go to the website, and there's the rates. So it doesn't matter which lender you go to; they'll all have the same rates under the MFA program itself. So don't let that change you. Don't go to a bunch of different lenders. If you want, pick one or two. If I said don't apply for credit cards and that sort of thing before, don't do any of that kind of stuff. Just make sure. I do want to jump in and talk about one more program, if it's okay with you, Jason.
Yeah, let's go.
So the other program is we want to talk about is veteran programs, the VA loans. The VA loans are not necessarily a first-time homebuyer program, but a VA loan definitely has a zero down requirement. I will tell you, there's a tremendous amount of veterans that do not know or not aware that they can buy a house with zero down payment. If you're a veteran and you have a disability over 10%, then they have what's called no VA funding fee. The VA funding fee is VA's mortgage insurance. On top of that, if by chance you are 100% disabled, then the state of New Mexico does not charge you property taxes, which is huge. And I've a $200,000 house, the taxes are what, maybe $300 a month, or 200, whatever. You don't have to pay that. So you can qualify for more of a house for the same payment and be able to get into a house. I love VA loans. I love helping veterans. I've been doing them for 30 years, great loan programs. And I will tell you, I've done VA loans for homeless people. I did a loan for a gentleman that his daughter found him, and what a wonderful story that, I don't have to go on too long about it, but the daughter found him, and he was living on the streets, just real sad situation. And he came into my office one day and sat down, and, he's got absolutely no credit. He's got absolutely nothing. But he does have a bank account because actually he had plenty of money in the bank, but we sat down and we worked it out for him. We had to get a VA exception because he had no credit for, some like 20 years, no home address, whatever. But we worked with him, and we took care of him. And he's right now currently living in a beautiful house with his family, and he loves it. So
Wow.
I love veterans. I love helping veterans. Jason, I know you're a veteran, sir, and I thank you for your service. And I just think it's really wonderful that the things that can be done for veterans to help them. And like I said, if you have a VA disability or up to 100%, there's huge discount. And my company loves veteran loans. We like helping, trying to pay back the small way we can. We have excellent rates for that and excellent programs. The VA, the credit score, according to VA guidelines, there are no credit score requirements, but you do look at overall credit. So if you had a bankruptcy last year, or you did something that doesn't really, so they won't look at that you have to have a credit score, but they'll look at the overall credit itself. But I did a loan for a veteran about 2 years ago. His credit score was 561, but it was 561 because he made some mistakes and he wasn't able to reestablish credit. And he didn't do that. So we worked with him to do that. So I just wanted to put that out there. The VA loans are also a great first-time home buyer program. You don't have to be a first-time home buyer, but the zero down is an awesome program for us to work with.
Well, fantastic. Well, Ken, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor and jump up on the participants and push me back over to being the host, if you would.
I don't know if I'm going to do that, but I'll try it, sir. Yeah, I see it. Okay.
All right. And so you'll kick me on over and make me the host. It should be when you scroll over my name, there's a little more button with a little arrow. And if you click on it, it should be able to do that. And we're actually going to take a little break. I know I've got some people up on the Zoom, and I've also got some people up on Facebook Live. And want to let you guys know, we're going to take a little break. Our next presentation is actually going to be on is now the right time to refinance? Just some considerations about refinancing and what those options look like. So I'm hoping that I'm going to go take a little potty break. I've been on this call for about 2.5 hours now. But I want to let you guys know we're going to be jumping back on here at noontime with just some general information about is refinancing now the right option. So Ken, thank you so very much. One last time, we got the plug. KenYellen.com. Ken works with a lot of our first-time home buyers, and he can be reached again at 505-220-2968, or you can visit him with an online application at KenYellen.com. That's YELIN.com. All right. So Ken, thank you so very much. Eternally grateful for your commitment to this community. I don't know. Are we keeping track of how many homes we've how many customers we put into homes together? That might be something that's kind of cool. I'm sure we're in the hundreds by now.
Great. We have to go back and check it out. Right.
But a lot of families are benefiting, from your hard work and such like that. And they're not renting because of that. So again, I appreciate that. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the 2021 Gallup Housing Summit, and we are going to be continuing here in about 25 minutes at noontime with Is Refinancing Now the Right Option? Thank you so much, Ken. You have a safe weekend, and we'll talk to you later, my man.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.